Hello, my friends. Luiz Lima here once again doing our weekly program, Spiritism A Closer Look. Welcome to Kardec Radio. And on this program, we are going to take a closer look at forgiveness. Forgiveness is a subject that is widely popular in Spiritism. So we want to take some selected spots and discuss them right here tonight. We Before we even begin, the concept of forgiveness might be a little tricky because we need to make a distinction, and the distinction has to do with the concept of forgiveness. The concept of forgiveness, according to religions and belief systems which believe in reincarnation, is one thing. The concept, according to religions and belief systems which do not believe in reincarnation, is slightly different. We, as spiritists, fall into those who believe in reincarnation. So let me give you slightly the difference. For religions and belief systems that do not believe in reincarnation, in this framework, forgiveness is a concept that kind of floats around the idea of erasing the wrongdoings, erasing the faults. So within that framework, receiving forgiveness sounds almost like having the errors erased. The faults or offenses are absolved by a person, by a human being, whether if it's a mentor, a priest, whatever, is still a human being. So within this framework, with that concept, this might set a precedent for new transgressions and renewed forgiveness. So you do transgressions, forgiveness, transgression, forgiveness, indefinitely, on and on and on, because you're being absolved by a person, a human being. So when that person tells you, oh, okay, I forgave you, I just forgave you, or I forgive you, it's not that it never happened, things got erased. No. So, for those religions, those belief systems, it might set a precedent for repeated cycles of transgressions and forgiveness. Within that frame, this is sometimes called theological forgiveness. It's just a name. If you're going to read about forgiveness within that concept, that expression you might come across that expression. Now, Spiritism is believes in reincarnation, as we all know, and that falls into a slightly different concept, which is more sensible and more logical. Forgiveness in Spiritism establishes responsibilities for those who commit the transgressions and the wrongdoings. It's not simply a verbal statement, I forgave you, or I forgive you now. No, it's a lot more than that. Forgiveness within the Spiritist framework requires reparation. It's not this passive forgiveness like in the other belief systems, that you hear somebody forgiving you and let's go, let's keep doing the same thing, the next person is going to forgive me. That's very passive. In Spiritism, forgiveness requires repentance, expiation, reparation. So it requires action of certain form. So it's not this passive forgiveness. It's what I call the active forgiveness. It requires you to do something. It requires you to go through a process, repentance, where you prepare yourself for rehabilitation. That comes from within. And then you go into a second level, which is expiation, meaning you're going to have to offset or learn how to offset what was done and never do it again. You're going to learn from it. And a third level, a third layer, I would say, is reparation, where you're going to have to make things right. Now, there are two perspectives that we have to look into when we talk about forgiveness, because there are two angles, there are two sides here. The one who grants forgiveness, and the one who receives it. There are two different things with two different attitudes and consequences. So let's discuss a little bit each one of them. So again, two perspectives. The one who grants forgiveness and the one who receives it. That in itself brings up a question. When you consider there are two sides to this, it brings up a question. Is forgiven an act of kindness towards the other or of liberation to ourselves? That's an interesting question, because there are two sides to this, and we have to look into both sides to understand, what happens when you are forgiving someone or you are being forgiven by someone. So let's look first into those who grant forgiveness. So somebody comes to you, I want you to forgive me and so and so. So I'm going to grant forgiveness. Few considerations. Think about, for example, earlier in this life, when you were a kid, say 10 years old, or maybe 15 years old. And you had a fight with a friend at school, or, your parent, or one of your parents, or both of them, a sister, a brother. You just had this fight that triggered you to never want to see that person again, never want to talk to that person again. You just, erase that person from your radar. So that took place when you were 15, let's say 20 years ago, 30, 40, 50 years ago, long time. And as you propose to yourself, you have never seen that person again. You have never spoken with that person again. So what happens? I have this thing latent in my spirit, in my heart. Because in a conversation, let's say it was just a brother, for example. So in a conversation with somebody else, not even a family member, if in that conversation comes up, something about my brother, it can trigger a process. Not necessarily it's a disaster of a process, but it will trigger something. Oh my God. So that image of you or of us being part of that fight 30, 40, 50 years ago becomes present for a few seconds, but it's present. And so does that energy. And then, here's the logical approach to this. When you think about that person, just remember, you decided, say 30 years ago, that you were never going to see that person again, you were never going to talk to that person again. So today, 30 years later, when that comes up and you remember that person, do you see that person in your mind? Because you're not really seeing, but do you picture in your mind that person when that person was also 15? Or do you imagine that person as that person is today? Maybe married, kids, grandchildren. What we do is we go back to that day. That's the only image, only and last image that I have on my mind about that. I can't, if somebody asks me, how is that friend of yours that you guys had a fight, how is he doing today? Where does he work? Where does he live? Does he have a family? Does he have other friends? I don't know. But I hate him on that day. So I'm living on that day today. What a waste. 30 years. Wasting time carrying a shackle as if I was a prisoner of that circumstance. No inner peace. The minute that I forgive, everything changes. Everything changes because I detach, I open up, I detach the shackles from my spiritual feet, if you will. Inner peace comes. Preservation of health, because now I don't have to carry around this dark cloud over my head. It brings me joy because I just had the possibility of transforming somebody else's life that have been waiting for this forgiveness for 30 years. So it's an opportunity that we are given, that we have. It's our choice, of course, but it's an opportunity for us to practice good deeds. One interesting thing, and I'll never forget this. Nelson Mandela was in jail for 28 years for something we're not going to discuss, the reasons he went to jail in details. But, he went to jail for 28 years. Apparently, it was not just. Let's just put it this way. But it doesn't matter. He was in jail for 28 years. One day he walks out. He was granted, he was liberated. And he walks out. The minute he walks out, he makes a statement that became famous across the globe. And this statement, I'm just going to read to you so the statement doesn't get biased. The statement is, as I walked out the door towards the gate that would lead me to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. That's deep. So he could have left, the prison and everybody behind and carry all the bitterness and all the hatred and all the rage and desire for revenge. He would be still living in that prison without the physical bars in front of his eyes, but he would be still living in that prison. So what he did is he cut that off. Forgive everyone. I don't want to have any resentment. I don't want to keep any of the hatred that I could be feeling right now. No bitterness, nothing like this. I'm going to live my life in peace, inner peace. Inner peace is not possible if we have shackles attached to the soul. So not forgiving other people keeps us constantly connected to the source of the pain, the event, the circumstance, whatever it was. Refusing to forgive creates obstacles to our evolution because it's like a prisoner. They have physical shackles on their feet. They can't walk. They're stuck. It's the same thing. So that's the idea from the perspective of those who will grant forgiveness or should. Now let's look from the other side, from the side of those who receive forgiveness. So, few comments. First thing, those who are receiving forgiveness have to understand, but understand deeply, that there is no erasure of errors. Nobody is erasing what you did. Not, it doesn't mean that the wrongdoing, the circumstance never took place ever, ever, ever in creation. No, that is wrong. That is wrong. It does not erase what was done. We need to understand, for example, not a thing. So how many times we have to undergo expiations because of things in the past, and we do prayers and we say prayers and we ask for help, and then how many times don't we just do this? We ask Jesus to free us from the problems that we are going to have to face as a consequence of that circumstance. So what we want from Jesus is he frees us from it. That takes away, that would, if that would happen, that would take away all the responsibility that we bear because of what we did. So what would be the point of forgiveness if somebody is going to do this for us? It's never going to happen. It cannot be, and it will never be outsourced, because forgiveness depends on something that is untouchable. It's called free will. I have to decide to forgive or to ask for forgiveness, if that's the case, myself. You see, the need to ask for forgiveness, so we keep going, implies in tearing down the walls of pride. I'm not going to be able to go to somebody and say, listen, I did this wrong and so, I want to, I'm sorry for it. It's something in the past, but I want you to forgive me. For me to do this, I can't have walls of pride in front of me. They have to be torn down. Who tears them down? Me, myself. It's free will. So forgiven and being forgiven are serious things. It's not just let's play around a little bit. No, that is very, very, very serious. So let me bring a few things more here. Let's look at what is forgiveness and what is not. So forgiveness is not forgetting what happened, condoning the wrong, allowing the harm to continue. That's not forgiveness. Now, forgiveness is freeing ourselves from resentment. Just like I told you about Nelson Mandela. Forgiveness is breaking the negative emotional chains that are attached to our souls. And if they are, I cannot walk towards perfection. Forgiveness is choosing not to harbor grudges. They got to stay in the past. So from the Spiritist perspective, forgiveness represents a closing of doors. Forgiveness closes a cycle of spiritual learning. If I don't forgive, the cycle never closes. So I'm always part of it. So I'm still living 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or even worse, incarnations ago with this thing. So let's say something happened, 5 lives ago. What happens throughout these 5 lives? That other person might be incarnating with me and being with me. And I don't close the cycle. So I'm always living on that day or around that circumstance. The true beneficiary in forgiveness is not the one who grants it, even more so than the one who receives it. The one who grants it is the true beneficiary, more than the one who receives it. Because when I grant, I'm liberating myself. I'm cutting ties to negative stuff. So the one who receives forgiveness becomes a beneficiary, if you will, only if this forgiveness serves as a catalyst for moral transformation. If it triggers in that person who received forgiveness, oh my God, I was forgiven. Let me think different now. Let me do this different now. Let me stop and analyze my life a little bit. The person who forgave me, let me learn a little bit. It was a difficult situation. I don't know if I was able, if things were the other way around, I don't know if I was able to do it. So there's a lot of learning in there. So forgiveness sometimes is so complicated that we are not able to do that on the same incarnation that the circumstance took place. That's why we are granted several lives over and over again until we clear off all and erase all the or detach all these shackles that we have accumulated throughout the existences that we had. By the way, the very existence of reincarnation in itself signifies forgiveness. That's God forgiving us. And here's another opportunity. Go. Give it another shot. So why can't we do the same for other people? To retain the resentment is a lot more difficult than forgiving. Forgiveness is the easy part because you forgive. The shackles detach from the soul and we are free. Retaining the resentment requires a lot of engineering, a lot of strategy, a lot of hard work to be able to sustain that for years and incarnations. It's a lot more difficult to retain this than to just forgive. It's a matter of understanding. And Spiritism is very, very, very clear in that sense. It takes a lot more energy and a lot longer to hold on to the grudges than forgiving. Refusing to forgive sounds like a sentence to the one asking for forgiveness. If you refuse to forgive somebody, it's like, oh, here's my sentence. We're not judges. We can't do this. This is only a negative for ourselves. Forgiveness is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of spiritual maturity. So, we should just let go of the shackles, the enemies, the grudges. Let go of all these things. We forgive for our own health, to sustain a healthy life and a healthy body. Because if we don't forgive, the negative energy is floating around and it won't be any beneficial for our health. Science now knows that the state of mind has direct impact on our cells, our physical bodies, our organs. We get sick, we acquire illnesses and diseases because of our state of mind, because we are sustaining all these things, and we should not. I like one of these statements that Martin Luther King gave us. And what it says is, forgiveness does not mean ignoring what has been done. It means that the evil act no longer remains a barrier to the relationship. Think about this. So that person that I had a fight with 30 years ago, why don't I have a relationship with that person anymore? Because there's a wall between us. There's a barrier to that relationship. That barrier is taken down when I forgive. And then the relationship is alive again. And according to Spiritism, how do we progress? Via relationships. In a society, learning with other people and teaching other people. That's how we acquire spiritual growth, not by a degree that comes from above. There's no such thing. So it's a very interesting view that the barrier is there because, I don't want to forgive the person. Growth requires healthy relationships. Growth will never happen with shackles in the soul. So forgiveness becomes this key to personal and spiritual growth. So a lot of people say, why should I forgive? Still a lot of people, why should I forgive? That's what I try to discuss here tonight. But I'm going to say one thing that I always tell people. I think the greatest merit in forgiveness is being able to forgive those who cannot even ask for forgiveness. Their heart is a stone. Pride doesn't let them ask for forgiveness. But why should I wait for that? Why should I wait for somebody to come over and say, I want you to forgive me? Why can't I just do that to free myself from all this thing? That is the greatest merit in forgiveness. Being able to forgive those who cannot even ask for forgiveness. Thank you, my friends, for being part of our talk today. Thanks for those on the chat. And don't forget, Spiritism: A Closer Look airs every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Kardec Radio. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next week.